Jeff Fuller with you. You are listening to the podcast for Living Hope Wesleyan Church. This is with a great friend of mine, Andrew Maves. And just want to encourage you, you can visit our website. It's under construction, hopeforvermont.org, hopeforvermont.org. But without further ado, let's welcome in Andrew, Mr. Andrew Maves. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. If I can get this in the camera, I took my Nugenix, how do you say this? The testosterone booster, because I'm trying to work out and get big like you. What's your secret? Did you just have the genes of always being muscular, or did you take these supplements?
No, I've never taken any supplements in my life, although I have a friend who is a Canadian champion on multiple levels, powerlifting. And of course, he takes different supplements because he does so much training. And I've had the joy of working out in his gym for years. Right now, I'm doing stuff on my own. In my garage. So I'll be out and I'll be doing some bladesmithing and pounding some metal. And then I've got to wait for the metal to heat. And so I'm out there with dumbbells, and people just must think I'm crazy, but it's okay. But I enjoy working out, and I still, even though I'm 45, I'm still feeling like it's so good for me. But you got to take the time for it, or else I think you go nuts.
Oh, that's a fact. And that's part of my evil ploy, is really to use you to get to your powerlifting friend so he can join me on my sports podcast, Jay Fuller Interviews. So you know me. That's how I roll. But hey, behind me is a picture.
Yeah.
Behind me is a picture of you and your family. We just dropped off my son for his first year of college, and we met together at college. But your daughter is going into her senior year, final year. You're up in Nova Scotia, the Maritimes, Atlantic Canada. What's it like for you being a dad and knowing that this is your last year with your daughter at home?
Well, it's funny, hindsight, right? They always say hindsight's 20/20. I know that my daughter missed kindergarten, or whatever we would call it. You guys would call it her very first year of school, by 6 days. And we had to keep her home for another year. Now, she's always been a brilliant girl. She's got a great mind. And so she was ready for school. And we kind of said, well, should we hold her back? I mean, we could fight for this. It's only 4 days. We decided not to stir the pot on her first educational experience, and we kept her at home. And now I want to tell parents, enjoy your kids, because it does go so fast. And I've been in youth ministry since day one, and I've heard 1,000 regrets. And Alice and I always said, when we decided to have kids, we were going to make it a priority. And so I've been conscious of every stage of trying to be there. Like her first day of school, I've got video, her first, everything, so first bike ride, I've been there, first hike, I've been there, because of my floating schedule. And even with all that time invested, it still goes very, very, very quickly. And so I'm so glad we have one more year with her. Like I'm dreading next year. And when I saw Michael was going off, I was like, you got to be kidding me. But then I was hit in the face with this reminder that Ella will be going soon too. And Elias, he's actually, since that picture, has grown another foot, and he's looking me in the eye. Of course, sometimes he tries to push his weight around. He's going to be a big man. But I've instilled enough fear in him over the years that he very much respects me. So it's good.
All right. So Andrew, this is product placement, Kingswood University. So drink my coffee.
I'll drink mine. This is anniversary number 20 bamboo cups, so that I didn't waste all the church cups.
Well, there you go. And we first met several years ago. I was actually a sophomore, just because you come from Ontario and you have grade 13. So we're the same age, but I was a year ahead of you in college. And it was awesome for me just to be at Bible college, where people do complain, well, we didn't learn anything for real life, which maybe is true. However, we learned about friends, friendship, lifelong people that will always be there in your life. And we first met, I remember putting Caleb in the trunk as a freshman. That orientation, it was kind of stupid, but we did that. But it just seemed like we hit it off right away. And before I talk so much, I just remember my dad, when he met you, he knew you as the axe thrower. And you guys didn't call it the woods. Like we all said, hey, we're playing in the woods. You guys called it like the bush or something. Like you guys are, I don't know.
That's been people. A little bit, since I moved to Nova Scotia, people don't like that term bush either. They call it the forest, and sometimes they call it the woods. But I said real men work in the bush. And Yeah, so it's one of those things. But of course, when I was younger, I did some woodsman competitions, which was kind of interesting. So I would be in canoes competing. I would be doing kettle boils competing. I would do axe throw competing, quarter chop when some feller goes MIA, and they need somebody. So I've always loved living off the land, and my dad taught me that. I mean, we've been hunters and fishers. There's still a gun beside every bed in my home, right? Like that's one of those things that we just grew up doing, harvesting the land and all that sort of thing. So now that I'm in Digby, Nova Scotia, every year we have festivals. We survive essentially on festivals and tourism. And so apart from our fishing, of course, but one of the festivals always has a woodsman competition, and a great friend of mine, Greg Thomas, is the guy who still runs that today. And so it's kind of always been a part of my life. I can't escape it, but I don't want to either.
Well, I want to ask you about growing up country. You just kind of alluded to it, but it really developed who you are, that resolve, that character. Did you ever want to live in the city?
No, I visited the city, and when I was younger, that didn't always turn out so well. I remember, run, it's the cops. Anyway, so I found the city fascinating and fun. Like we would go to the city for concerts and things like that, but I've always felt at home. Like, we have people, especially in my neck of the woods here, who they get God in the reality of the surroundings around them. And I've always been that way. Church to me, I've had great church services just sitting by the riverbank. I've had great experiences with God when there's nobody within miles of me and I'm hiking a ridge, out in the water, fishing, praying that sharks don't come and get me, those sorts of things. Like to me, God reveals himself in this canopy of church that he has created called planet Earth. And so that's when I feel the closest to him. And again, you know what? I love what I do, and we have great worship services, and I love all that sort of thing. If I could combine the two, then that's a perfect day, an outdoor service and doing that sort of thing. And we do that quite often in town for different festivals.
So I want to back up a little bit for those just tuning in or listening later. This is one of my best friends in the world, Andrew Maves. And Andrew, thanks again for making the time. But I love the story. Mutual friend Caleb's going to come up a lot. But talk about your journey into finding out about Jesus. Caleb invited you because girls were going to be a part of the camp. What's this story about you learning about Jesus?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Caleb and I, of course, mutual friend, when we were kids, like I gave him my Batmobile, like the little dinky car. And we went to kindergarten together and all these sorts of things. And we played hockey all of our lives. In our teen years, really, I was raised in a Christian home. My mom and dad were really solid on that. And Caleb would come with me to youth group. And it was kind of interesting the way God can intertwine lives and use that. But I brought Caleb to camp, and yes, it was because of girls, and he was learning to play the guitar, and he was listening to some of my Christian rock and roll, and some of my old Striper and things like that. And of course, he ended up coming to know the Lord. And then in our later teen years, I was really fighting that. And I was trying to decide who God was for me, and it was Caleb who was the one who was encouraging me at that time. Say, you know what, you know the way, and you know the one, and you can't deny God. And anyway, he challenged me at a time in my life when I was almost ready to run. And Caleb was instrumental in bringing me to Kingswood, and instrumental in being a foundation that encouraged me in my faith when my faith was fragile. And it was amazing to me how God brought that all together. So Caleb and I, he's always going to be there. It's like you. We do have those few friends, and I try to tell my kids this: you've got many associates and you've got many friends, but there will be very few great friends that you'll have for a lifetime. And Caleb certainly is one of those friends for both you and I.
Well, for sure. And I just remember when you first came to Bethany Kingswood now, you talked about how you were reluctant. When did you feel that infamous call on your life to vocational ministry, and when did it solidify? Were you at Kingswood at the time?
Well, I'll let you know when that happens, to be honest with you. Yeah, there was one night actually. I remember I was running around the track at the elementary school, and just we often, although confession is good for the soul, we were supposed to be in at midnight. That's usually when we would break out. And I would go down to the local gym, which was a co-op, so I had my own key. I would run late into the night. During those years, I was dealing with insomnia, and partially because I was trying to wrestle to the ground what God was to me and who he was to me. I had watched my parents all my life have an unshakable faith, and it worked for them, and therefore I couldn't deny it. But I remember one night, and this was my first year, running around the track, and I was still trying to work out my salvation with fear and trembling and understand that God really was who he said he was. And so running around the track, I'm screaming up at the sky saying, "What do you want?" Like, and yelling. And then all of a sudden came to that moment where I stopped in mid-run and I went, either God does exist or I'm crazy because I'm talking to him. And this peace flooded into my life like I could never explain. And a surrender for the first time in my life. I just said, Lord, I have made a mess, and it's now your turn. So I yielded my life. And it was kind of one of those amazing moments where peace and clarity, sleep came, like so many things came together in my life to become clear. And I kind of was still saying, okay, do you want me in ministry? I was working at King's Church that very first year as a youth pastor under Dan Lamus. And he had the senior high, I had the junior high. Shortly after that, I kind of had the whole youth group. When I graduated, I had a job, even though Don Ingersoll had not offered it to me. I kind of assumed I was supposed to be there. That was my wife, Allison. That was her home church. And I've never looked back. But it was that night running around the track when God became so real to me that dismissing him was no longer an option. And boys, that was the best night of my life, right? My life has changed since. And I wouldn't trade anything for it. I mean, again, it's been an amazing journey.
Why is surrender so difficult?
Because we're made in his image, right? And when I look at this, and I preach this all the time, that I'll say, you try to be self-sufficient and you try to be God-like, and that's because you're made in the image of God. And who is God? God is a problem solver. Who is God? He is the way. So being made in his image, we naturally want to be that problem solver. We naturally think we know the way. And we will fight it and fight it and fight it. And, for those who may be listening to this today, that's a journey. For me, it's a lot easier today than it was back those 20 some years ago. But again, I just know that there's going to be chapters where your best time is going to be spent wrestling yourself to the ground and allowing God to do what he wants to do. Don't fight it. I mean, you're not going to win. If you're a believer, you understand that process, but it's okay to argue with God, and it's okay to be frustrated with circumstances. But in the end, it's never okay for you to lead, because man left alone is going to self-destruct, and your history will prove that to you alone, if you're being honest with yourself, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. And now you find yourself in Nova Scotia, Digby Wesleyan Church. How long have you been at Digby?
16 years we've been here.
16 years. When you first got the call invite to go to Digby, what were your thoughts?
Oh, man. It's an interesting question. I had just left King's Church, and again, an awesome church, beautiful church filled with friends. We'd been there 10 years. It was the only ministry that I had known. And so leaving that was a hard decision, was a big decision for us. Our district superintendent at the time was a great friend of mine, but an incredible man of God and mentor, Dr. H.C. Wilson. He had asked me to go to a couple of different places around our district, and I told him no. And I really do pray about those things. I think God is that detailed in his design that he has right choices and wrong choices. Again, he's going to honor you when you honor him, because when you are a child of the King, he's a good father. He's going to bless you. But I do believe he's so specific to have a place for us, right? A plan. And so I had said no to a couple of places, because when I pray, God hits me with a 2x4. It's just like, Lord, I want it to be clear. We know, he knows, and I knew I wasn't supposed to be at any other place. I was about to purchase a home in St. John, New Brunswick, and he called me up and said, Andrew, I've got an opportunity for you. And I said, I was shocked he wasn't mad at me because I'd already said no a couple times. He told me about a little town called Digby, and it was right across the Bay of Fundy. It was kind of interesting. I'd never been here, even though it was only a 2.5-hour boat ride away from where I had lived for 10 years. And I kind of said, well, we'll check it out. Allison and I, again, married at the time. Ella was just 1 year old. We came for a Father's Day service, and the situation was terrible. There had been a scandal. There had been an affair. The pastor's wife at the time was with the police chief in the town. It was very known, and it was very awkward. The church was struggling. People were hurting. Nobody was trusting the RCMP. Nobody was trusting the church. And I just went, wow, what a great opportunity. So anyway, we went in obedience of checking it out. The people were amazing. The place was amazing. We had prayed about it. Allison and I both said to each other, we're not going to talk about going until we get back. Like what you don't like, just keep it to yourself. Ask the Lord to be speaking to you. When we were driving back to the boat, I said to her, I said, how are you feeling? She says, we're coming to Digby. And I said, I'm so glad you said that, because that's the way I'm feeling too. When we were here, I was out in Culloden. It kind of overlooks the town, and I could feel just this oppression. You know, it was something out of this present darkness. It just, and the Lord was kind of saying, I need you to come. And if you're willing, there's going to be some neat things in store. And I really felt that peace, same kind of peace. When I surrendered on the track that night, like over 20 years ago, or 10 years ago at that time, or 15 years ago. And so I look at all that and I go, wow, he led us to Digby. There's no question in my mind. The church had an incredible recovery. It wasn't me, because I'm not smart enough for any of that to happen. We all know that it was the Lord. And we asked ourselves, even when we first got here, I said, would the community miss the church if it was to close today? And at the time, I would say nobody would have necessarily missed the church. It was so hurting and so broken and had been involved in so much pain. We watched God do incredible things in the next few years. And I can honestly say that if the Digby Wesleyan was to close today, I believe the town of Digby would be devastated. They'd miss us. And again, it's just because the people have come together and there's a force to be reckoned with in town. We try to meet needs. We try to love our community, and the people here have done such an incredible job of just that, loving the community. And I believe that's what Jesus wants every church to do, right?
So on the best friend side, it pains me to say this, but on the pastor ministerial side, I say it with great pride. But you are very talented. Behind me, it's you acting. You're an artist. You do some phenomenal things. As a pastor, you get to do baby dedications and marry people. And when you first thought of going into vocational ministry, I know for me, I always thought youth ministry, but when then God transitioned me and you from youth ministry into the lead pastor role, how did that change you? How did you find yourself equipping yourself for that new role as a lead pastor versus that as support staff?
Well, it was interesting. I mean, I've still will come to youth group, right, on occasion and still be that senior pastor. I've always wanted God to remind me and never let me escape how hard it was growing up and some of those pressures. That was kind of my prayer as a youth pastor. When I transitioned into this role, I was one of the youngest senior pastors on the district at the time. And was I equipped? No, but my reasoning is always a little twisted. I kind of said, hey, things are going down the hill fast there in Digby. If I fail, it wasn't my fault, right? And so nobody would blame me. If it succeeds, I just got to make sure that it's absolutely God who gets all of the glory. And some of those skills were kind of interesting. I noticed as I started to transition, and I was preaching every week. Now, I had been preaching every week at King's Church because we had a pretty significant youth group at the time. And when I moved here, it just seemed to be a natural flow for me. Now I've always been a little outside of the box. I know that might be hard for people to imagine. So when I speak, I still am very free and raw. But for our area, that's something that I think people really have really appreciate it, right? That here's somebody who's representing the church, who is tangible, who's touchable, who is real, who is raw. And so for me, I mean, again, when I made that transition, Kingswood did a great job. I'm not saying that, but they can't prepare you for the horrors of life. I can't imagine the stories that I've had to lift to the Father over the years of brokenness, of people that were in messes, and so making sure that as a senior pastor, I didn't carry those things, because we can't carry that weight. And God has given me an ability to really, you know, take it to the Lord and leave it there. And I actually leave it there. I don't pull it back, which is something that I think is a powerful thing. And of course, reading, I read, like, I got 4 books on the go right now, which when I was in university, you know, confession time again, I never did finish it. I never finished the book. And so I look at that, and I have a passion for the written word, of course, scriptures, but also some great authors that are out there. I listen to podcasts. I've been listening to your podcast, even the sports one. And again, you've become quite an interviewer. Oh yeah. So there's, when we talk about gifts and skills, it's been kind of fascinating.
Well, thanks. And it is fun. And during this pandemic, we've all been challenged to be a little bit more creative. I just remember a few years ago when we were looking to leave this space and what it would look like to rent a facility or have multiple services. You told me, I don't know if you remember it, you told me a bunch of stuff that has stuck with me. We'll get to another story after, but you said if your vision is big enough, you will always be tearing down and setting up, meaning multiple services to accompany the groups that are going to be attending. How have you grown in the sense of not just trying to get everybody in one building at one time, but especially during this pandemic, to be creative to get the gospel out to the people so they can share the gospel with other people?
Yeah, the pandemic, I mean, that's a good question, because this is new territory for everybody, right? In Digby, it was kind of interesting. We have a church that it seems like every time I'm looking down our long church, it's a long church. I'm actually at the back of it now. Every time they wanted to make it bigger, they just made it longer until we ran out of room on the lot that they're on now. And we kind of said, you know, back in the day, we need more room. And now we can build a multi-million-dollar building to fit everybody. But our economy is such that we have a lot of people who are making $12.50 an hour. I mean, and that's just, so they're already sacrificially giving just a tithe, right?
And that's Canadian. That's Canadian money too.
I know, it's like it's like your toonie. You don't even have a toonie. Do you have a toonie yet? No, you do have a dollar coin, don't you?
For special occasions.
Oh, special occasion dollar coin. Anyway, so we kind of said, if we had that kind of money, I would love to put it into the community. There's more community needs than we need a fancy building. So we went to 2 services. That was going so well and was filled up that we started a 3rd service in a neighboring community just down the road called Cornwallis. It's like about 12-minute drive, and all that. So we had 3 services going whenever the pandemic hit, and then all of a sudden we couldn't meet. So of course, like so many, we scrambled and we went online. And again, sometimes I would just be talking to people in my cap, like I'm talking to you. We did a Bible study in James to try to show people, okay, this is how we study the Word of God as we prepare for a message. This is how we dig into it. These are the tools that we use. And we found a lot of people online started to follow those skills. We had several families that bought a brand new study Bible, like right when the pandemic began, because they wanted to study the Word of God with me and figure out how we do that. And so they were listening to that advice. So we found our online presence was incredible. Nova Scotia, we did a couple of things locking down from the rest of Canada. We did have an Atlantic bubble with the Maritime provinces. So we've had few cases of COVID, which has made it convenient for us to get back to meeting. Right now, we take services of 50, and the maximum would be 60. We kind of got this 10-chair extra possibility, sure. But we're filling up all of our services again, and we're about to relaunch in Cornwallis as soon as we know that schools aren't going to be shut down and shut down the province again if there's an outbreak. But we continue our online presence. We have a podcast, and we have a lot of people who are tuning into that. A lot of people who haven't come back to church yet, But every week we've had new people that had started to tune into our online things, and we're so happy and encouraged by the things that they were being taught that they decided they wanted to be a part of a church. And so I encourage people all the time, being a Christian is amazing. Being part of the bride is Christ's idea. And so when we come together in a church that preaches Jesus and loves their community and loves one another, my land, there is no greater family to be a part of than that. And so we're seeing, as we get back to our physical meetings, we're seeing a lot of new faces, and it's been wonderful getting to know some new people in my community already, right?
Yeah, for sure. I love the fact this picture behind me, you're looking pretty cool. It was a while ago, not because you're not wearing skinny jeans, but because your beard is so short. But I love the fact that God uses the things that we love, because I believe he created us with those things to be used because we love them, and he created us that way. And you were a part of a motorcycle rally, a motorcycle and church rally. It says on the Wesleyan.org page. Can you just talk about how that all came to be? And first of all, were you frightened or nervous that things wouldn't work out, that it was just your own love for motorcycles, not a tool that God would use?
Yeah, I preach this a lot too, that some of our edges that the church may say are not exactly conducive to the ideal Christian life. I don't buy into that. Jesus was a rebel, and Jesus painted outside the lines all the time. And so I've come to embrace some of the things that make me different. When I was younger, it kind of felt like I needed to fit into their mold. And my brother really didn't do that very well. And I watched him go through some of those pains of not fitting in really well. As I got older, I got to know the Lord on such an intimate level, he reminded me that some of the things that people find shocking are some of his creativity in me.
Yeah.
And so I've embraced coloring outside of the lines a little bit. When I first came to Digby, there was two fellers, Peter Robertson and Alex Johannes, who had this idea, why don't we start a Sturgis? And so they wanted to have a biking day. Well, the town said, not a chance. But anyway, they came to me and said, look, you're new in town as well, but people seem to trust you, and they're glad that you're here. You're a biker. And I said, yep. And they said, would you be willing to stand with us and to start a bike day? And I said, no. And they were like, what? And I'm like, I don't want a bike day. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. We have to have a bike weekend. And the reason why is I said, I want everybody we invite to know that we're going to be having a church breakfast on Saturday, and we're going to invite them to a church bike blessing on Sunday. I wanted it to be an outreach. If I was going to be a part of it, I wasn't going to drag the church into something that seemingly had no purpose other than fun. I wanted it to be fun, but also built upon the foundation of Christ. And so I said, look, I'll be a part of it if we do it for more than a day. I want to do it over the weekend. I want to have a biker breakfast. I want to have a biker blessing. That's going to be a part of the event right from the beginning. I want it to be family friendly. If some vendors come that aren't family friendly, they can put up a curtain and we can say you have to be 18 to get behind the curtain. But I wanted it to be family friendly because I had my daughter at the time, and I knew that she was only going to grow. I wanted her to be proud of the town that she grew up in. So anyway, they took me to council, and they shared their vision. And some of the council was kind of looking at me, and I'm like, hey, let's do it. And it became one of the biggest motorcycle gatherings, arguably, in all of Eastern Canada. And so this is our first year in 16 years that we haven't had the Wharf Rat Rally. This is the weekend of the Wharf Rat Rally coming up. And I've got a wedding down at a little resort that's in the back part of our community. And I hear that they're completely booked with bikers. Apart from this wedding, all the campsites are booked with bikers. So while there is no official Wharf Rat Rally, we are finding that the bikers are still coming to Digby, and they're still going to meet with their friends and celebrate. And that gives me great joy because I love the biking community. I do. Again, there's some bad apples in the biking community, but they're in every part of our community. But for the most part, you're never going to find a greater bunch than those who are living life, in the wind and touching the road like that.
Well, it's so good and very true. I was just going to say as a comment, because we're friends and not to make fun of you, but if there's a big COVID breakout in Digby, I'm going to blame you because you're the one that got that motorcycle rally all started way back when. But
We'll take
so
it. Take it.
so my son had a motorcycle for I don't know a year and a half, and I drove it one time on the main road, and I did not figure out where the turn signals were until I was down the road. I was like, this is not going to be good. And actually, I made it back alive, but that's the last time I ever took a motorcycle on the main road. So I just want to keep this pretty face pretty, and I'll stay on the sidelines and let you guys ride as you do.
There you go. That's a whole mouthful of something.
Hey, so huge question, and this is where we could talk about the glory day. It's so fun when you talk to good friends like yourself, because it's like we've always been together, even though we've been separated by miles, distance, haven't talked for a little bit. But I also like to pick your brain, and that's we just breaking news, just hired a part-time assistant pastor. It's only 10 hours a week. But for you, what was that like to go from youth pastor to lead pastor to a pastor over other pastors? Can you just share that?
Well, it's interesting. I have a lot of experience being in a multi-staff before I ever had to run a multi-staff. King's Church is one of those churches that has always been a larger church in our district. And so I was under people, and it was amazing. Like Don and I will talk about this today, Don Ingersoll. I learned a lot of what I need to do from him. And I also learned a lot of things that I didn't want to do from him. And he knows that. Like we talk about it all the time and laugh about it now. And he was one of my greatest mentors. And it was kind of funny because the first week that he hired me, he said, if you're looking for a mentor, go somewhere else because I ain't going to do that. I have got time. And I totally valued his honesty. But as I watched him and saw the weight that he was carrying, I did learn a lot of what I wanted to do, and I learned a lot of what I didn't want to do, and I sorted through all of those things. And I've always had great leaders in my life. I've always had people who invested in me. I think of Dan Lamus, I think of Mike McNeil, some of those people that you would know that have always been close to me and always been great leaders. And so when I took on a role of leadership, I've always, when I'm making decisions, I'm very conscious that it's not just going to affect me, it's going to affect my staff. And so I really try to think those things through. I try to think those, even my experiences when I first came to Digby, they wanted me in a parsonage. And so a lot of my salary and my package was going to a home that I could never own.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that. And I said, if you guys want me here long term, I think we need to be in a housing allowance. And then I can choose to do what I want with my housing allowance. And so it took a few years for me to get them to understand that. But when that began, I remembered what it was like to fight for that. And to really try to lead through that, to say, if you want me here, I would love to be here, but I want to have some freedom. And everybody's dream is kind of to own their own little portion of land. Why should my dream be any different? And so we have my wife, of course, right now is on an honorarium doing some music with me, and she's doing a great job. We have Kirtland Peck, who is a young man who from Bear River, right from down the road, who is getting his education as we speak online, and he's working with me every week. He looks after our student ministries. He's up actually to preach this week, and he's a fantastic young man. And so as he's working through getting his education, and the church is able to help him with that, which is amazing. Like he's going to be able to get a degree and come out debt free. And I keep reminding him how incredible that is. But when he is done, we are hoping that he would stay with us, and we'd be thinking of all of those things that will hopefully benefit him and not hinder him, right? So
that's really good.
You can't, it's not just about me. And when you have staff, you got to set self aside a lot. And that's okay, because it keeps you humble, and it keeps you, I think, in a better place than without any accountability at all. I think accountability is something that we should embrace. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I just think back to your story and how God's used you, and just how you've endured such loss and had to surrender. And I just want to bring up, just because I get to meet your dad, and I love your mom and your parents, and going to camp. The camp with the tin roof. What was the name of that camp in Ontario?
Zion Hill Camp.
Zion Hill. Yes, yes, yes. That's where Dan Lamus prayed and the rain stopped. That was phenomenal.
It was a pretty neat
Phenomenal.
night. Yeah.
But losing your dad, can you just talk about what that process is like? Because growing up isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, my dad always used to say, he would say, son, getting old is no fun. I don't recommend it. And when I was a kid, I'd be kind of like, I don't understand. The alternative seems to be pretty bad too.
Yeah.
But of course, he was one of my heroes, and my dad and I were very, very close. He was a great man of God, and so many lessons. Like, I just think of he didn't have a father. Like, his dad was hurt in the bush. A tree had fallen on his leg and broken it. And when he was just a few months old, the blood clot in my grandpa's leg took his life. And so my dad grew up without a father, and yet he became such a great father to me. And of course, you know some of the story. My dad wasn't really involved in my life. He was worried about giving me a better future. He worked himself almost literally to death, got sick, had 7 strokes when he was in a coma, did a lot of talking to God, and God promised him that he would be healed. Came out of that. We were praying for him around his hospital bed in Ottawa, Ontario. And he interrupted us, and he was paralyzed on one side. He was like, "Don't pray for my healing." And we're all like, "What?" And he was going, "Don't pray for my healing. God has already healed me." And we thought, well, his mind's gone. So there you go. But we had doctors telling us that he would never live. We had doctors telling us that he would never come out of it. If he did, he would never walk again. And, you know, our God is bigger than all of those things. And so my dad came out of the hospital and became this incredible leader of our family, became a credible leader in our church and in our community, and taught me life lessons that I am so grateful for today. When he passed, it was really hard, like it is with anybody. I think all of our experiences make us better leaders. So even understanding how to grieve with those who've lost a family member, I've certainly taken all the notes from that. We run a program called Grief Share here at the church. Yeah. And we've had so many people go through it, and so timely in so many people's lives. But every person that I lose gives me another perspective of a different stage or a different level of grief. And certainly my dad was one of those. But the cool thing is I haven't lost him. I know where he is. The promise of my Savior would say that one day I'll see him again. And so it's amazing, even the hope that we have in Jesus, it takes our mourning and it really does turn to joy. I may start off the day hard when I'm missing him, but it doesn't take me long to start laughing again and valuing all that we had. So even when it starts on a sad day never turns into a bad day, or a sad moment never turns into a bad day. I guess that's the way it is with Jesus. Yeah.
That's really good. That's great perspective as well. I know for me, it's been interesting with this pandemic. As I mentioned, we dropped off my son to college in Michigan. With the borders being closed, we had to drive stateside, which took a lot longer. No Tim Hortons coffee for me. But how are things for you? Is it still the Maritimes are locked down and you can't visit your mom if you wanted to in Ontario, or are you allowed to travel within Canada freely as you would before?
No, in fact, we've had a couple of friends, even as recent as last night, kind of online, upset that they couldn't come and visit the Maritimes this year and spend some time with us. And they do the whole whale watching and have the Maves experience, so to speak. So they were a little disappointed and sad. And I said, look, that's the world in which we're living. My mother had come down to visit me right before the pandemic had broke out. We fly her down and fly her back as often as we can. We try to do that at least once a year, just to see her so she could see the kids and all that sort of stuff. She just got down here and was here a week, and the pandemic broke out. Well, she was kind of panicking because they were talking about shutting down Canada. They'd already shut down the US border. And I kind of said to her, Mom, I know that you're here and we love having you here. You need to make that decision. Essentially, if you stay till your flight leaves, you may be stuck here for the summer.
Yeah.
And that's worst case scenario. And I said, they haven't restricted flights yet. We're still trying to figure this out. And she said, you know what, I'm a little scared of that because she has a home still in Ontario. My brother and my nephews are there, and she had bills and all those sorts of things. And so I said, we can do some of that online, but it's up to you. She wanted to go home. We flew her home before her flight date, and she got out in time. Now we're kind of going, okay. She's saying, I'm missing you guys, and I'm saying, hey, you chose to leave. But the reality is I'm not sure when we're going to get to see her again. We do have an Atlantic bubble. In other words, we're allowed in the Maritime provinces to see each other. So I can go over to New Brunswick. In fact, we just hosted my mother and father-in-law for a couple of weeks, and it was so great seeing them. We did the whole mask on picture, family picture, and that sort of thing for that visit. And it's a joy seeing Murray and Clara. That's my mother and father-in-law. But of course, I don't know when we'll see my mother again, because just as the U.S. border is closed, so is the rest of the Maritimes. Now, that's frustrating. I never thought we'd be living in a day where even within our own country that we'd be limited, but we've seen a lot of changes we never expected in the last 4 months. It's happened fast.
Oh, that's very true. I was going to make a joke about Clara, but I will hold off for now because you make enough on your own. But I do want to ask, with Allison finding her at Bible college, her having very strong, great Christian parents, what do you pray for your daughter and Elias as far as a Christian spouse? Because it seems as though, or media would tell you, or just looking at their friends at school, that Christian spouses are going to be hard to come by for our kids. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting. As a parent, everything changes. Nobody can prepare you for the level of love that opens up in your life and in your heart when they first place this little life in your hands and say, now you're responsible. So fear and all those things, like, I'm going to kill it, right? But I since day one, when we brought our kids home from the hospital, I have been praying for their life. I've been praying for their schooling, what they will do for a living. I've been praying for who they would date, who they would marry, and knowing that some of those things were all going to be challenges. Now that they're older, I guess I'm so proud of both of them because they do have a great network of friends. They both are leaders. A lot of their friends don't come from a church background, and that's fine. As an evangelist, a lot of my friends don't yet know Jesus as well. And so it's one of those things where when they're together with friends that don't necessarily share the same values, they are leading the way. Like, both of them have been at places where they said, no, I'm good. I'm gonna say farewell for today. And they exit the situations that sometimes they're in. They're both vocal when it comes to, yeah, my dad's a pastor, and they're both vocal about their faith. And so I'm so proud of them on those levels. But I pray for their future mate all the time. If they're to have a future mate, again, we can't assume that that's just the road for everybody. And so my daughter has not had a whole lot of time for the drama of relationships yet. She's going to be turning 18 here in October, and she's been content to invest in school and piano and some of the things that she loves. And she's a hilarious, fun, awesome young woman. And you know what? I know guys are watching, and that's hard for me because then I just want to kill, right? but I've been patient, and I look forward to the day if she decides to start dating. And I do look forward to that. I've been confronted with that a lot because I've always been involved in youth ministries. So there's been a lot of weddings. There's been a lot of kids that I've watched grow up, and I've worried about who they would find as well. And I've had those conversations with all those kids. But it certainly is different when they're your own. And so, yeah, I think prayer moves mountains, and I've been moving mountains for 18 years for her and 14 years for him.
You froze up a little bit. I think you're back now. And so I just want to ask you a question. Maybe I froze up on your screen, but I had the opportunity to speak with Brent Ingersoll, King's Church, a couple weeks ago, whatever it was, and you served there as well. And we had a discussion about some of our friends that went into vocational ministry, but they saw their families and ministries and lives kind of fall apart just by choices that they have made. How important is it that we continue to support our Christian brothers when they go through difficult times? I know having the evangelist heart, it's like, oh, you just need Jesus and know his love. But sometimes for others, it's more difficult.
Well, it's, the church hasn't always done things well. What's the problem with the church? It's man-made in that sense and man-run, right? Now, of course, it's Christ's idea, but I, for years, have always been frustrated when there has been, a slip up in ministry, and then people have been written off, and it breaks my heart. I have friends who have been there, who, I would call them a month after the most devastating time in their life, where they confessed even a sin, and the church basically showed them the door, and I didn't know all that was going on, and I called them up a month later, and I'm crying with them, and they're saying that you're the first person to call me. And I'm like, what? Like, how do we behave so poorly when we preach grace and mercy? And you know what? So I've always been an advocate of saying we need to come alongside anybody who's hurting, but certainly those in the ministry who've given their life to try to lead and put themselves on that fishbowl where everybody is criticizing and everybody is watching, and the pressures people don't always understand. They think that we only work on Sunday. That's not the reality of anybody's life in ministry. And so, I hope that the church, and I've seen some changes, which I applaud the church, the Wesleyan church, certainly I know more about and how they're doing things. I love the way that over the last few years, they've started to work with families and individuals that are broken and love on them and get them counseling and get them support. And to me, that's something that should have been done all along. And sadly, it always wasn't. And I'm glad that things are changing. Certainly, I hope that every one of us that are in church leadership would run a building in a church in a community that would be filled with mercy and grace. Now, again, there's accountability, and some of that restorative healing requires an awful lot of accountability and tough love, but it should all be done in love. That's the whole key there. So I haven't always, and even myself, I haven't always felt loved by the church. So those are the things that I try to change, in this place called Digby, Nova Scotia. I want us to be a church that loves our community and shows mercy and grace. And I'm so excited to see the Wesleyan Church is making a lot of inroads there. When we see pastors fail, instead of being shunned, they're being embraced. Should have happened a long time ago, but praise the Lord that they're doing some things differently now.
Most certainly. And I think God's been revealing to me that vulnerability is important, but I think we're getting more and more comfortable being vulnerable and showing our scars and showing where we hurt. But accountability is that next steps to really bring that healing process. One thing I remember, I think you were a senior and I was a first year in vocational ministry. I called you, I was crying, I was upset, something stupid happened, and it was really nothing bad, but my feelings got hurt. And I don't know if you were headed to the bathroom or if you were too busy, or maybe you did hear from God, but you said, Jeff, I feel for you, but have you made time for God? And I said, no, I called my mom and it rang and rang. I called my brother, but he didn't pick up. So I called you. And you said, I love you, but I'm going to hang up on you. Go spend some time with Jesus. And you hung up. And I was like, all right, I love you, but I'm mad at you right now. But it was definitely the best thing I needed, and the life lesson I've had to learn over and over again. When people come to you first as pastor and they expect you to solve their problems, how important is it that Christians realize we actually have the power and resolve in Jesus, and then he uses other people following that aspect?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And to me, I break it down into kind of two categories. I have those who come from the community who want my counsel, and my time in a town our size is pretty valuable because there's a lot of people who want it. And so right out of the gate, if I don't have a connection with them in the church, I don't necessarily owe them anything. But what I can show them, what they're seeking is the truth, and what they're seeking is the way, and what they're seeking is direction. Again, I'm not that smart to give it to them, so I can only point them to Jesus. But one of the things that I do to guard my time is I'll make them make an appointment, essentially. So I'll give them some contact information and say, look, I haven't got time to talk now, But next week, there may be a few openings. If you want to call me back and let me know what days you're available for, I'll try to fit you in. There's been people over the years who have not contacted me back. Well, right there, I know that they're not necessarily ready to take my time. And so no guilt on my end. I just let it go. It was on them to call me. When it comes to believers, of course, I'm always going to make time. And I try to get them into an appointment as soon as I can. And I do a little bit of the same thing. I'm not the answer, although any wisdom that I have comes from one source. And so, of course, we get into the Word of God, and I try to point them to Jesus. And another thing, you know, in my counseling, I've always felt like the church, for a lot of people, we've held their hands and drugged them along, or we've stopped everything we're doing and we've sat down with them and had tea and sang Kumbaya, and the church has suffered because we've stopped growing, because we're pouring all of our attention into an individual. I think the church is way better served when we teach people that, you know what, the Holy Spirit is our counselor and our guide. He's alive and well. He's living. He wants to guide you through every step of every second of every day. Let's get to know him. And usually what I do is I try to get people to learn how to stand and walk and run. And pretty soon they understand that, you know what, through the power of the Holy Spirit, they can fly. And at that point, they're leaders with me. Then I've created a counselor, someone to aid with me in ministry, and it's been a pretty rewarding experience. But I don't waste time in counsel. I'm probably a horror story for most people who, when they first come to me for counsel, because I'm very, very honest, they're like, I don't know how I got here. And I'm like, what, are you a moron? Come on. Like, you got here by choices, and it's choices that are going to change it. And so I'm very real and I'm very raw. People come sometimes looking for permission, and they do get a little bit of a lecture sometimes, and but always in love and always in mercy and grace. And then if people show me that they are willing to put in the hard work, then I will move a mountain with them. That's absolutely true.
Pretty amazing. You're a great friend, and I just thank you so much for making the time to join and share part of your story today. A couple fun questions maybe to get you out on. Simply, if you were asked to play a role in a fictional movie or TV series, would you want to play the hero or the villain?
I like playing the villain. I think it's kind of fun because it's not my. I look like the villain. I always, you know, when I walk into a store and parents are grabbing their children and pulling them closer because the crazy tattooed biker guy came in. I just think that it's fun for me to get into that character, and I do a little bit of acting here, even in Digby, and I think it's kind of fun to play something that's out of our wheelhouse of our normal life. So I would choose the villain 10 times out of 10. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Hey, and so I stole this from Hernando Planos. He has a Be Contagious podcast. He's been on my sports show a couple of times. He's a coach and great basketball leader, player developer. And he asks, if or when the feature film is made about your life, who plays you in that feature film?
Oh man, I would play myself. Like, I would just kill that role. I've been doing it for so long. I think I'm ready. I think put me in, coach. Like, I'm ready.
All right. So who plays your love interest in that feature film?
Oh, my wife and I, we would need a tarp. And that goes back to a whole story that I can't share online. But anyway, yeah, I just, you know what? I do love my life. If I had to play it, I would want her to play my leading lady. And, you know, it's funny. I tell people all the time, marriage is hard work. But when it's also hard work to fight. Yeah. So you're going to be doing one of those two things, either loving or fighting. You're going to be putting energy into it. What I've discovered over the last 23 years is that when I spend my time and energy investing in love, the return is way better. And, you know, we've been married a long time, and it still is getting better. And I can't imagine life without her. So she would be playing that leading role.
That's a great word right there. Hey, so I'm going to call what some would say the bluff. You could have asked me what is in my coffee cup, and I would have asked what was in yours. But we're good Wesleyan pastors, so all it is coffee with a little maple syrup. But what are a couple of the books you are reading? You said you're in the middle of 4. What are a couple of the books you're reading now?
I'm reading one about Grace Awakening by Chuck Swindoll, which is just kind of an old book that I've had for a long time, and I haven't had a chance to dive into it, but I've been really challenged on that. I got a brand new one, well, two brand new ones from Mark Buchanan. He's a Canadian author, used to be a pastor, now is a professor. And when he did that transition, he kind of stopped writing, but I love his books like The Holy Wild, Your God is Too Safe. All those have really impacted my life. His new one, he's got two. One is called David, and it's going to be a 3-part series, and it's the first time he's ever written a novel. So I was quite excited about that. But his other new book is called God Walk, and he tries to pull down this idea that so many religions have a physical discipline that comes with it, whether it be Tai Chi, like you must know Kung Fu, right? That's another whole inside story.
Yes,
but,
yes, it is.
And Mark Buchanan is saying we are called to walk with God. What does that mean? And I think that it's a fascinating idea. It's challenging me. I'm reading an Andy Stanley one right now called Enemies of the Heart, and that's one of the series that I'm doing right now. We called it Pre-Existing Conditions, is the sermon series, and talking about original sin and how we can, if we're not aware, the unexpected will happen, and we shouldn't be surprised. We should expect the unexpected when it comes to a disaster for our soul, because we have pre-existing conditions, right? The pre-existing conditions being sin. So those are a few of them that I have on the go. I have a Stephen King novel, which I'm reading just for my fun, because he's a fascinating writer to me. So yeah, I've got quite a few books on the go.
Couple podcasts that you would recommend?
I've been listening to yours. Whoa. And you know what? I've watched you improve, and I've been excited about that. I try to listen to Brent, of course, sometimes. Brent and I have a history together. I always enjoy what he says. I was devastated when Rabbi Zechariah passed. And so I find myself going over some of his old things, and I'm praising God that they were recorded and taped and all of those things. And I listen to him quite often as of late. Probably for nostalgic reasons, but also I've never come away from Rabbi without being humbled and learning more. So those are some of the speakers that I'm listening to. Francis Chan is always a good one that I try to put on. Mark Driscoll, even though he's been through the ringer the last few years, he's always invested in me with his words, and so I really appreciate listening to him as well. Yeah.
And then with the NHL playoffs taking place, are you happy, sad? What's going on there?
I'm waiting for football to start. You know what happened? I've been a Toronto fan all my life, and all my life I've known pain. So this year was no different. This is the first time they didn't even make the Stanley Cup playoffs because the playoffs didn't start until the first round was done, and Toronto was playing at home and was done by the first round. So I've been sad about that. I've always been a Patriots fan. In fact, I'm wearing my.
I see it. I got you.
Yeah, so I'm waiting for the NFL to start. I hope they're learning from Major League Baseball and the way that the NHL has bubbled with the NBA and different things like that. The way they're bubbling. I'm hoping that our season in the NFL is not destroyed, because my hockey season, we got Vancouver still in. That's the only Canadian team. I'm kind of cheering for the Flyers. Which last night they pulled out a squeaker. It was not impressive. So I'm cheering for the Flyers right now, understanding that I probably won't get the joy of the Stanley Cup win. But I'm waiting for football to begin.
And for me, the Boston Bruins did not do well in the bubble, but the Boston Celtics seem to be. They're up 2-0 on your Toronto Raptors.
Oh, so I saw that this morning because I had some things on the go yesterday and I couldn't watch the game. Sometimes I tape them. But the Raptors are a little bit of a mess right now. Now, again, we the North, hopefully they rise a little bit, but we'll see what happens. I am impressed with the experiment of doing the bubble. And you know what? I think of those guys as professional athletes. They've got a lot of pressure on them. Certainly the days in which we're living doesn't help. We had more pressure, but you see some of those guys who are adjusting to it well. You see some of the other players who are not adjusting to it as easily. It's going to be an interesting year. And you know what? Our pandemic's going to become a little more normal. I think we need to be ready for some big life changes. There's things that have changed in the church that I don't expect to ever go back. Like we don't pass around a plate. We don't pass around communion like we used to. Some of those things are going to be our reality in the future. And Major League Sports is one of those big groups where we have to start rethinking how we do things and maybe change some of it forever.
Well, I think the Wesleyans ought to put all the pastors in a bubble, and then we could just hang out and share stories and sermons that way. But who knows? Who knows? Andrew, I love you, man. Thanks so much for coming on. Stay on after I sign out, and we'll talk some stories off air. But thanks again for making the time.
Well, I love you too. It's been so great, and I always appreciate the time that we're together. I appreciate that we can pick up where we leave off. Like, even if there's been months and months we haven't talked to each other, it doesn't change. But I guess that's what being part of the family of God is all about, but also having one of those few close friends is all about too. So anyway, I love you. I appreciate you. I pray for you all the time, and I love what you're doing. Keep changing eternity. Let's do that. Let's keep impacting the kingdom.
Without question. Thanks, Andrew. Again, Andrew Maves, Digby Wesley Church. You can jump on their Facebook page, go to the website, and just check them out. It's awesome to have great friends share their stories, because it will make your story much better as we follow after Jesus together. And again, you can find this at Living Hope Wesleyan Church, the YouTube channel, Living Hope Wesleyan Church. And also join us Sundays, 9 a.m. virtual service online, at least at this point, hopeforvermont.org.